Views expressed by Camaplan podcast guests may not reflect those of Camaplan. Camaplan does not guarantee the accuracy of information provided by guests, nor does it endorse or recommend any individual or organization. Camaplan is not an investment advisor, CPA, realtor, or attorney. You are encouraged to conduct your own due diligence before making investment choices. For any tax, legal, accounting, investment, or other questions, please consult a specialist. Hi, I'm Michael Duncan, and welcome back to The Road to Financial Freedom. This podcast is brought to you by Camaplan, a self-directed IRA administrator focused on educating investors on how to grow retirement savings faster through alternative investments. In each episode, we're going to take an in-depth look at the many roads taken to financial freedom and how they differ for each of our guests. Our goal is to help the listeners learn how they can achieve their own financial freedom through the experience and stories of experts that have done just that. Today's guests have spent the past decade studying human behavior, particularly as it relates to personal leadership and personal finance. He is an internationally recognized financial literacy expert and leadership workshop facilitator, as well as the author of 4 Amazon bestsellers, a 2-time TED Talk speaker, and the creator of Broke, Busted, and Disgusted, a CNBC documentary. I'm very excited to welcome Adam Carroll to the show today. Adam, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. I have to be honest. The first thing that I did when when we got ourselves scheduled and all that was I checked out your TED Talk.
Yeah.
And it immediately hit close to home because I love Monopoly. If you haven't heard his TED Talk, I will link it in the description of this episode. But before we get anywhere else, could you just tell me kind of what that experience was like? Having that go, semi-viral, has over 6 million views on YouTube.
Yeah.
What that was like.
Well, it was amazing for a couple of reasons, Michael, and it's got a good backstory. I did that talk in London about 7 weeks after I did one at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And so I did my very first TEDx event, was very excited by that, but candidly knew that that was not the one that was going to go viral. The video was not that great. The lighting was poor quality. It was a great message, but it just didn't have the production quality. And then I'm sitting there in London at this beautiful facility. The cameras are rolling, and I had the most intense sense of imposter syndrome you can imagine. Because here I am, some dude from Iowa that played a game of Monopoly with his kids with real cash. And there were all these phenomenal personalities, individuals in their own right, that were delivering messages that I thought, no one's going to watch my talk. And then when they launched it, what had happened was they used copyright protected music at the very beginning of the video.
Okay.
So it launches, it had, 50,000 views in the first week or two. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is it. This is going to go viral. And then they called and said, hey, we apologize. We have to repost your video because we use copyright protected music. And I'm like, well, that's it. It's not going anywhere. And now here, lo and behold, granted, it's years later, but we're at 6 million and climbing. And I think the message is just as important today as it was when I delivered it.
I mean, honestly, when I first watched it, I didn't even really look at the timestamp on it. It's from what I think was it 7 years ago?
Yeah, 2015.
Yeah.
2015.
So the message, and I'll do my best to sum up the message, and you can obviously correct me if I'm missing it entirely. But the idea was you sat down with your kids, and instead of using Monopoly money, because of the way that they tend to treat Monopoly money as it's not real, you instead replaced it with real money, $10,000 in cash, and you saw how the differences in their play style changed. And the overarching message being that, children in particular treat money a lot differently when it's a tangible thing. And I think that message is so important nowadays, even compared to 7 years ago, with just the endless uproar in Venmo, in Cash App, in NFTs, in Bitcoin, in all these different things. I mean, now more than ever, it's just money is so far from being a tangible thing that, you throw in the pandemic where some places weren't even accepting cash.
Yeah.
I mean, it just becomes more and more real, and that message becoming more and more important as we move forward today. Have you noticed that kind of response to your message throughout these years?
I have. There were 2 really core messages or responses to the TED Talk. And number one was because of the title, When Money Isn't Real, the $10,000 Experiment. I got a lot of people who were commenting in YouTube and on the TED website. Well, yeah, money isn't real. It's it's all fiat currency anyway. It's
Yeah.
all printed, all an idea. I don't disagree with that, but it wasn't necessarily the message that my talk was. I think the title itself kind of gave way to that. The second message is that yes, people treat money differently when they're using their credit card or Venmo or Zelle or however they're sending money. And I think that sort of goes to the heart of it being a psychological issue, Michael,
Yeah.
in that when you swipe a credit card or more aptly, you hit one click ship on Amazon for a $47 product, a part of your brain actually lights up that's in positive anticipation of receiving that thing on your doorstep. Whereas if you had a $50 bill, you're reluctant to give that to someone because of the pain sensor that fires in your brain at the thought of losing $50. And so this is why I thought the message was so important, particularly for young people and for families with young people, in that they're being raised in an environment where I can go buy stuff on my watch, and my kids have no conscious or did have, they at one point had no conscious understanding of what it meant for that money to transfer from one account to another and what we had to do to make it. So those two messages by and large are the two that I think hit home to people watching the TED Talk.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I couldn't agree more. That was something that, and I'm 27. When I was a kid, that was something my mom did her best to make sure was very, at the forefront of my mind is, even as I was getting into high school and I had a much better understanding, she would
Yep.
constantly say like, "Hey, you have a debit card. Obviously, it's connected to the money that you have." And I
Yeah.
was working, but why don't you just take out money every week instead of spending on your
Right.
debit card? So that way, you're creating a budget for yourself.
Yep.
You're you're making money tangible in that way. And
Totally.
again, it hits so far home that 10 years later, it's now so much harder to do that. So it's incredible to me that like how that message has really resonated and expanded upon its meaning and its importance.
It's been a wild journey, and I'll tell you, Michael, when I first delivered that, I was a good 10 to 12 years into a career where I was speaking on college campuses all the time. I mean, I would do 40 or 50 or 60 engagements a year on a college campus, just all across the country. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to deliver the message was I was witnessing firsthand 18 to 20, call them 24-year-olds that were still either operating in a cashless environment or their parents,
Yeah.
this is probably more to the point, their parents were still making the majority of their decisions. And so it frightened me that I had young kids at home and I'm thinking, I don't want them to leave my house at 18 and not know what they're doing with money, because that's what I was noticing was 18 to 24-year-olds that had no conscious understanding of what 40 or 50 or $100,000 in borrowed money actually meant,
Yeah.
or what $1,000, pre-approved credit card offer could do to them long term if they just treated it very casually, like most of them
Yeah.
were.
Yeah, a good friend of mine in high school, and I do not recommend doing this at home, but good friend of mine in high school when he got a credit card, he called it his unlimited money card.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
thankfully he's not actually that dumb. He did know it was a joke, but it's still a scary
It's good
proposition.
branding though,
Yes,
if nothing else. I mean, credit
exactly.
card companies pay note.
Fantastic branding.
Yeah.
But so all right, so you mentioned your career, so let's go back a little bit.
Yeah.
I guess how did you start in this industry? How did you get to where you are today? Could you just take me
Mm.
through that timeline?
Well, pre-interview, you were talking about you being from the music world and doing audio engineering and things like that. I was a broadcast journalism major, and there were some news people of the day when I was growing up that I really looked up to and thought that's who I wanted to be. And then I got out and I realized that the folks in front of the camera really don't make a lot of money starting out right away. And I was at a point where I had significant amount of student loan debt. I had credit card debt. The joke is I was upside down in my car. My dog had just died at home and my girl had left me at school. So I sounded like every Dirk Bentley song ever written.
For real.
And I realized that I needed to make money. And the people who were making money in my industry were in marketing. And it just so happened that I got introduced to a gentleman who referred a book to me. And he said, "Hey, you need to read this." And it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And then I got down this rabbit hole where I read The Cash Flow Quadrant and The Wealthy Barber and The Richest Man in Babylon. And then I was just going all the way down that aisle in Barnes and Noble. And then on Amazon, what other personal finance books can I read? And over the course of about 2 years, Michael, I read 120 books on personal finance. And they say that if you've read 7 books on any topic, you are considered an expert in that topic. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go teach this because clearly I know enough to get myself out of debt and into a strong financial situation. Why don't more college students know what I know? And so I started teaching that at the college level, and that led to writing books, and then the documentary and the TED Talks. I mean, it's all kind of evolved out of just this passion that I had for understanding my own idea of personal finance, and then further expanding that to the topic of this podcast, which was financial freedom, and really going after that really hard myself.
Yeah, and it's incredible. I mean, obviously, yeah, it started as a goal for your personal financial freedom, but then you very quickly, within that 2 year span of reading 120 books. Wow. I'm not sure I've read 120 books in the last 10 years. In high school or middle school, maybe. I read a
Yeah.
lot more back then, not so much anymore, but
Well, to be fair, my wife was working nights as a nurse. So every night she'd leave. And like for the first 2 weeks, I watched reality television and just could feel myself getting dumber by the night.
it is addicting though.
Oh my gosh.
It
I
is
mean, I watch
addicting.
more Bachelor and Bachelorette episodes than I care to admit. And at one point I just thought I have to turn the TV off and get better at what I'm going to do with my life.
Yeah.
And reading money books was just kind of an addiction for me, because I really like the ideas that were being presented in the sense that I could actually engage in some of them.
Yeah.
And I think that was the key, was whenever you're reading a book of any kind, to ask yourself, what of this can I apply right now to make my life better? And I just kept doing that over and over again.
Yeah, typically, when I read books, I can't ask that question because I'm reading Harry Potter or
Yeah.
Percy Jackson and the Olympians, and
Yeah.
not a lot I can really apply there.
Love
I
that.
wish I could, but not really.
Yeah.
But I do love that you immediately went to the question of, okay, I can teach this. I want to help these 18 to 24-year-olds that you
Yeah.
previously realized they have no clue what's going on, which is true. I mean,
Yeah.
as a recent graduate of both college and high school, I mean, somewhat recent for high school, I'm nearing a 10-year reunion, which is horrifying. But you know, I learned nothing about that stuff in high
Yeah.
school. And thankfully in college, I had an awesome professor who decided to run a personal finance class my senior year, but that was
Nice.
it. Like that's all that I learned. It was that and whatever I had learned from my mom, which thankfully she was very on top of that stuff and I learned a decent bit at home. But um I love the way that that transformed your approach and really transformed your career into what you're doing now.
Me too. It's been a wild journey. And I look back to some of the mentors I had along the way that really helped guide and shape what I was doing and when I was doing it. But I think to your point, Michael, we really have two, well, maybe three alternatives. One is school,
Yeah.
and I will say more and more high schools today are trying to layer in personal finance. It's still not a graduation requirement in all 50
Wow.
states. I think only 18 states require it right now. That in itself is a disservice. The second option is our parents. And I think people get more negative habits and behaviors from their parents than they do positive. That's a very broad brush statement. Some are very good about it.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, we watch what our parents did. And there is this theory that from 0 to 9, our money personality is being shaped. And if you think about how old your parents were when you were 0 to 9, I mean, at 9 years of age, I think my parents were 33,
Yeah.
and no one has a lot of money in their 30s, and they're trying to figure things out and all that. So I was hearing, we're broke, we can't
Yeah.
afford it, or do you know how long I'm going to have to work to pay for that? And that's the kind of messaging that we get as kids. So we have to control that to a certain extent. And then the third area, I think, is ourselves just having an interest in it.
Yes.
And that's somewhat dependent on how you were raised, because if money was taboo, you never talked about it, or worse yet, people thought about it, there's going to be this underlying message of, I don't even want to learn about money because it just created chaos.
It's the idea of, when something when you don't see something, it's not that scary. When you don't
Yeah,
talk about it, it's not that scary. But as soon as you accept it, the reality of it existing, it becomes terrifying. And I think money is
totally.
probably the foremost example of that in today's society for most people, because
Could not agree more.
it's a lot easier to just not look at my bank account if I know that I have to pay something soon, or if I know that
Yeah,
all my bills just processed, or, if I, it's a lot easier to not think about my student loans than it is to look at them,
indeed.
because one of them is a very large number, the other I can ignore.
And I
Um,
think to that end, people more and more are using student loans as an example.
yeah,
They'll say, I just want to get to the minimum payment I possibly can, and then I'll just pay it and I'm going to forget about it. And hopefully in 20 or 25 years, it's forgiven or sooner,
yeah,
But even that, I think to a certain extent is similar to sticking your head in the sand and just ignoring something existing.
yeah.
And unfortunately, that is the way that the situation is engineered. But I'm trying to teach people, listen, there is a way to knock these down and get rid of them once and for all. You just have to think differently. You have to think like a bank.
So, thinking differently, I think that's a
Hmm.
good transition into, let's start with the shred method. I mean,
Yeah.
it's right there if you're watching this on video on YouTube. You can see it's behind him, it's below his name. What is the shred method?
The shred method is it's a method of cash flow through your household. And the method of cash flow makes sure to leverage the income that you're making in the most efficient way possible. And the best way I can describe this, Michael, is the opposite, which is how most people function. The money goes into checking. The money sits in checking for a period of time, sometimes days, weeks, or months on end. And little by little, it drips out through debit card transactions, ATM withdrawals, et cetera. But for the most part, people are paying their mortgage payment, they're paying car loans, they're paying student loans, they pay their living expenses. And anything extra, the gurus will tell you needs to go to savings, investing, or an emergency fund somewhere, right? It's meant to be saved. It's meant to be kept there in a safe, secure bank account. And the challenge for most consumers is the money doesn't get to savings or investing. It goes to Costco, Target, and dining out. And the reason for that is idle money can sometimes be dangerous money,
I
right?
can
If money's
confirm.
just sitting in an account, you go, well, yeah, we'll go out to eat. We've got $500 sitting in the checking account and I get paid on Friday, so no big deal. And what we miss out on is the notion that the two greatest expenses we have, or of the two greatest expenses, one of them is the interest expense on debt. And so the shred method literally uses that money that's sitting there idle in a way that helps pay less and less and less money in interest every single month and allows you to build more and more equity or net worth over time. And so it's a very simple process. It takes people a little bit to figure it out, but once they get there, most people will say, "Why haven't I been doing this all along?"
So, could you just give me an example of what that looks like?
Yeah.
Say you're looking at me and my bank account.
Yep.
Just,
And are you a homeowner, Michael?
uh, yes, more or
Okay.
less.
Yeah. So let's assume that you have a home, you have a mortgage on the home, maybe you've got a car loan or a credit card sitting out there, but you've put enough down on your property that you have the ability to go get a home equity line of credit. That would be one option. Another option might be that you have some amount of money, call it five or $10,000, sitting on the sidelines that has been there for a period of time. It's your emergency fund, but you just haven't really touched it.
Mhm.
We will turn that into a shred account. And essentially, either the shred account or the home equity line of credit becomes almost like a sweep account. So all of your income now goes in there. And what the shred method does, by way of a powerful software that powers it, is it creates, based on an algorithm, how much of the money you're dropping in should go to blast away some of your debt at any given point in
Hmm.
time. And the point of it is that if you've ever seen an amortization table, which looks like a big waterfall, particularly on a home mortgage, the majority of the interest that you pay on a mortgage is in the first 5 years anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, literally 80 to 85% of your payment is likely interest. And most people will only stay in their home 5.5 to 7 years. So if you imagine the first 5 years of your mortgage payment are 85% interest, and then every 5 or 5.5, 6 years you move, you're never really creating a lot of equity in your home. You're
Yeah.
just paying a lot of interest to the bankers. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm following.
So effectively what we're doing is we go after our debts, and candidly, we start with some of the smaller debts like credit cards and car loans, if nothing else, to free up the cash flow every month that you're paying on those payments. So we're freeing up the maybe $200 you're sending to your credit card or the $500 you're sending to your car payment, because that, through the shred method, will allow you to shred your mortgage that much faster.
Hmm.
And when you shred your mortgage, you do two things. You create equity in the property, right? Because you're blasting away the debt itself. But as a byproduct of that, you're creating more liquidity because you have more access to the equity in your home. But what you're really doing is you're clawing back a bunch of the interest that you would normally be sending to your bank, thereby effectively giving yourself a raise. Because if you think about it, if someone's making 100 grand a year, could be 25 or $30,000 a year is going out the door in interest payments.
Yeah.
So imagine giving yourself a raise of 10 or $15,000 using the exact same income that you currently have. That's the power of the shred method.
So it's, sacrificing the short-term money sitting in your bank that's not doing anything for the long term of now that you've gotten rid of that debt or that interest payment, you have more money to do what you'd like with.
That is exactly right. And the issue with that money that sits idle, and this becomes a question a lot, is, well, how much should I keep on the sidelines? Am I plugging it all in, or am I keeping
Yeah.
some out there in emergency money? And the answer to that is it's very personal. So
Yeah.
some people want, 5 grand or 10 grand sitting there that they know they have available all the time. And, we've met younger dudes that are like, no, I got 400 bucks. I'm good. They don't care how much it is.
I've been there. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it really depends. But what we often will tell our clients is that there's a difference between available money and accessible money. So money that's available is money you could go get tomorrow or today. You can go to the
Hmm.
bank, pull it out of a money market account or a savings account. Accessible money might be money that's either in home equity, or it might be credit cards that you can access. You're not using regularly, but you have access to them. It's that kind of logic, because we have been, I don't want to say sold a bill of goods, but we've been engineered to use banks in a way that is most beneficial to banks.
Yeah.
And when we do that and we feel really good about it because we've been trained how to do that, the banks are laughing all the way back to the bank themselves.
Yeah.
It's why you can't drive a 2-mile radius around my house and not hit a $10 million building that houses a bank that just built it in the last 2 years. They've just made record profits, and they do that because we are the compound interest vehicle of the banks.
Yeah. We're not doing anything to take advantage of them, even though it's available to us.
That's exactly right. And it's a product or service that most people have ready access to. They just have never figured out how to use it the way we teach people to with the shred method.
That's interesting. So, where can listeners learn more about the shred method?
Well, the easiest way is to go to theshredmethod.com. There's a
Very cool.
masterclass there, which you can watch anytime. I think it's maybe 25 minutes, but if you watch it at 1.5 speed, you can get through it in about 16 minutes. Um, it will tell you everything you need to know, Michael, in terms of how the math actually works.
Hmm.
And what's most interesting is when people plug their numbers into the software, the calculator that we have on our site, it will show them to the month and day when they would either be completely debt free, or at which point it makes sense for them to, blast away their mortgage to a certain level, and then know that 60 or 70% of every payment they're sending in is going to principal, not to interest.
Wow. That's something I'm gonna look at for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, again, that stuff will be linked in the description of this episode, and Adam's gonna talk about it again at the end before I let him go, but we're not there yet. The next thing I wanted to ask you about was the entrepreneurial money mindset, the idea of
Yeah.
taking calculated risks to bring value and get paid massively for doing so. Can you
Yeah.
tell me some more about that?
I had this epiphany years ago that the whole idea of being an entrepreneur people thought was risky. And candidly, just to be 100% transparent, my wife for a long time even said, "Your business is risky. This makes me nervous. This is risky." And all the while I'm watching people get laid off from jobs, and I'm thinking,
Yeah.
that's risky. That's the risky business, is having one employer that on a whim can say, oh, sorry, you're out of a job. And whether they give you a severance on the way out the door or not, you're still reliant on one group to making sure that you're paid. And so the epiphany that I had, Michael, was I started viewing entrepreneurship as taking calculated risks. And there was you may have seen this. I don't know if you would remember. Red Bull sponsored a dude who went up into the exosphere
Yes.
in a balloon. Do you remember
Yes.
seeing this?
Yeah, that was bizarre, but yeah, I remember that. Hard to
And he
forget.
was basically, it was the tallest or longest free fall sky jump or
Yeah.
skydive in history. So this guy goes up into the exosphere, which is not necessarily, it's the outer atmosphere, basically. You're not completely in space, but you're almost in space. And he's jumping out of this helium balloon, basically, that keeps expanding as it gets higher and higher. And he goes into a complete flat dead spin. If you've never seen it, you have to Google Red Bull
It is incredible.
skydive. And I'm thinking, how does this guy not chunder in his helmet? He's just complete dead spin.
Yeah.
But the whole time I'm watching it, I'm thinking, but it was a calculated risk he was taking. Because you can't tell me that they didn't have computer calculations and professionals who had done every kind of scientific experiment on this. They'd figured out the aerodynamics of the suit and all of that. He had jumped hundreds of times from high altitude to figure out if he was in a dead spin, how to get out of it. All of that led to me to believe that that was a calculated risk. The same is true in entrepreneurship, where if you want to start a business, figure out how to take a calculated risk in doing so. And what I mean by that is it would be risky for me to go open a pizza place right now because I know nothing about the restaurant industry, don't know anything about making pizzas short of what I do in my kitchen.
True.
But if I go work at a pizza place for a year or two and I study every facet of that business, then me going and opening my own pizza shop is a calculated risk. And particularly if I've studied coupon strategies and mailing to a specific, like farming a certain area of addresses to get people there with coupons or not, there's a way to succeed in business that's about taking a calculated risk, not about being risky.
Yeah.
And that's what I really I want to influence people in that way, that they can figure out a way to do it where you're mitigating the risk itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really, really, really good way to put it. Because at the end of the day, everything that we do that has the possibility of giving us a benefit of some sort is normally a calculated risk. I mean, you're right. Working for any employer other than yourself is a calculated risk, and it comes with the risk, it comes with the reward, just as being an entrepreneur and going out on your own. The risk being very different than having a 9 to 5 job, but the reward being very different as well.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a really, really, really good way to put it. And I've never quite, obviously the idea of investing being calculated risks is a very common, topic of conversation and a very common outlook upon it. But I've never necessarily heard the idea of being an entrepreneur being looked at the same way.
The investment game itself, I think there's a lot of risk involved. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who would say, "Oh no, there's risk, or it's risky to invest in stocks and equities and the market and real estate and whatever else we're invested in." And the way I would describe those two in a couple ways might be investing in NFTs and Bitcoin or any kind of crypto. If that is all the money you have and you're going long on that investment, that is risky.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
I have only ever put money in those kinds of vehicles with money that I am okay to lose.
Yep.
Because there is no guarantee on that, no matter what anyone says online. Similarly, in the stock market, if you're encouraged to invest in options, as an example, and you don't know anything about options, that would be risky. But if you've taken 3 different options classes and you've back tested all of these different options deals, and you know what you're doing, and maybe you're easing into it, that's taking calculated risk. And I think that's the biggest difference particularly for like college students that I was presenting to, is I would say, take calculated risks, don't be risky. And a lot of them would go just absolutely long on something before they ever knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah.
Or going and studying under someone. And I kept saying, what you're doing is risky. and it may pay off. And if it does, you're going to look like a genius. But I would much rather you take a calculated risk where your chances of success go up exponentially.
Yeah, I mean, what you said is very similar to the way that I look at, in a very different conversation, but sports betting. It's all calculated risk. The more that you know about one individual sport, and the more you know about the league or the player involved,
Totally.
it gives you an advantage over, if I was betting on cricket. Like that's
Yeah.
just a guess. That is the equivalent of me going to Vegas and playing the slots. Like
Yeah.
I have
No
no
doubt.
idea what I'm doing.
No doubt.
Uh, but yeah, it's very interesting, and I couldn't agree more that the idea of investing in those types of things are always just very based upon the knowledge, and that's how things become calculated risk. So I agree with that mindset 100%.
It is, and it centers on, I mean, it's the reason your show exists.
Yeah.
It's the reason that money books are written. And I would encourage everyone out there, if you're wondering, what to do with all of this or where to go, it's go pick up a book on whatever it is you think you'd like to be doing, or go find a podcast that's sharing that information and go deep into that content. I have a good friend who will spend 30 days on one topic, but literally every week he's carving out time to learn as much as he can about that one thing,
Yeah.
knowing that when he comes back at the end of the month, he's pretty well versed in whatever that is. It would be like reading 7 books on cricket and then
Yeah.
going, yeah, no, I'm good now investing in or betting on a cricket match.
Yeah, I think it would take more than 7 books for me personally
Probably
to
more
feel
than
good.
seven
Yeah,
books. Yeah.
for me to
Yeah,
feel
for
good
sure.
about betting on cricket, but maybe I'll put that on the to-do list at some
There you
point.
go.
But no, it's very interesting. It's something that I'm definitely going to take some time to mull over, because the that entrepreneurial money mindset is not something I've ever really thought about in that vein before.
It's too easy in today's day and age to test an idea, particularly with the onset of all of the different tools and resources, from building a website or selling things online, or, I mean, for that matter, anyone could start a business even on the side and do a proof of concept. That would be
Yeah,
taking a calculated risk. And I think we need more of that. I think there are entrepreneurs out there, or what I would call wantrepreneurs, who have just ideated and thought about doing
yeah,
something, but they think they have to go get an SBA loan for $500,000 to actually get started. And you don't. You need to get started and test it
yeah.
and then iterate into whatever the thing becomes.
And nowadays, it's not easy, but it's certainly easier than it probably was 10 years ago, and 20 years ago, and 30 years ago.
Totally agree.
So I've mentioned an infinite money card, but I'd like for you to tell me more about infinite banking.
Yes. So infinite banking, I was introduced to probably about 7 or 8 years ago.
Hmm.
And I have long been fascinated by the idea that it only takes 2 generations to create a Rockefeller type fortune.
Hmm.
And you need to ask yourself, are you generation one or are you generation two? For most families, they are probably generation one, right? So all of the people that I'm communicating with, it's not like they've got hundreds of millions of dollars waiting for them,
Yeah.
or even millions, and sometimes even hundreds of thousands. They come from a family that has made a living and made it work, but they're not, making an excess. They're not generating generational wealth. But when I started digging into generational wealth, what I found was that a vast majority of families who were creating wealth for future generations were leveraging infinite banking in the process. And infinite banking, to describe it very simply, Michael, is overfunding a cash value life insurance policy where you're putting in more than what maybe the premium suggests needs to be paid in order to create a bank of money that you can then use to leverage and deploy in a variety of different ways, starting a business, buying real estate, paying for college, whatever it may be. And so we help people realize that you can get into infinite banking and really leverage it to its extreme by using the shred method first for 12 to 24, 36 months,
Yeah.
and slowly working your way into infinite banking. And then step 3 is really taking what you've built in infinite banking and turning that into investments that create massive passive permanent streams of income, similar to what Gamma Plan shows people how to do.
I love passive income. And
Yeah.
we here at Gamma Plan,
It works.
passive income. That's fascinating. I like how it all kind of flows together. I think that was a very good full circle moment for sure.
Yeah, it's often kind of misunderstood. There are people who will say it's not a good investment. And what I would say to anyone who's looking at infinite banking and discounting it as a poor investment is infinite banking itself is a process. It's not a product.
Yeah.
So if someone is simply overfunded a cash value policy and they're hoping that policy grows to enormous values, you're missing one component. And that is the bank of money that's there is treated. You have to look at it almost just like a bank looks at its savings accounts of its members. If you realize how a bank operates, any amount of money that's sitting in assets or sitting in savings, whether it be checking, savings, money market, or CDs, the bank calls that a liability. Because money that's sitting in savings or a money market, they have to pay interest on. It's costing them money.
Yeah.
What a bank calls assets are the loans that it makes. And so if you have an infinite banking policy, the goal is you should be making loans with that money in order to create an income from it. And that's going to be other alternative investments. It could be real estate. It could be intellectual property plays. You could be loaning money as like a hard money lender.
Yeah.
There's a variety of different ways to do it. But the goal at the heart of it is that money needs to be in motion. It has to have volume.
I think that's a general lesson I'm taking away from this is not letting your money sit there and doing something with it.
Yeah.
I mean, which makes a ton of sense the more you think about it. So
100% velocity of money, right? It's always got to be moving.
So before I get to the point where I ask you to plug yourself and tell the listeners more about where they can find you, I'd just like to ask one final question. I ask it to all of my guests, and I would just like to know what the term financial freedom means to you.
I've thought long and hard about this, Michael, because I generally get the question of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
What is wealth or wealthy and what is financial freedom? And my distinction between the two, and I'll get to financial freedom here, but I think wealthy for me is a measure of time. And what I mean by that is if I were to ask most people, if your current income stopped tomorrow, how long could you live your current lifestyle? And I would say the average consumer in America would say, well, it's Monday. I could live till Friday afternoon at 4:00,
Yeah.
And so wealth for me is a measure of time. And by that, I'm looking at of the wealth that my family and I have amassed, if we stopped making money actively, how long would that money last? And so long as it lasts longer than I think I'm going to be alive, then I could consider myself a wealthy person, a 30-year or 50-year wealthy person, right? And by the way, I'm 47, but I'm going to live to 108. So I have 61 years left to make it work.
I love to hear it.
I'm just putting it out there. So
hey, the more you say it, you're talking into reality.
That's right. So then the idea of financial freedom for me is that there's more than enough money coming in passively than what it takes to live every single month. So when passive income exceeds your living expenses on a monthly basis, then you are financially free. So it relies on two components: constantly increasing your income, passive income especially, and constantly decreasing to the extent you can your living expenses. And so financial freedom is not hard. If someone's, can live on $2,500 or $3,000 a month, then they need to make $3,500 a month to have financial freedom in a passive maneuver. That in itself today is not very hard to achieve if you're studying and working towards that, taking calculated risks towards it.
If you know how to get yourself there.
That's right.
Well, I think that was very well said, and you gave us a twofer. You gave us your definition of wealth, which I will plan on stealing in the future because I think that was very well said.
Love it.
But Adam, please tell the listeners where they can find you, how they get in contact with you if they want to learn more.
So the best way, obviously, if you're interested in learning about the Shred Method, is to go to theshredmethod.com. Again, there's a masterclass there you can take. We have a calculator. There's a number of free resources. And if you're interested in hearing more from me or about me, you can go to Adam Carroll, CARROLL.info, adamcarroll.info. And there is my TED Talks, the documentary. There's a link to that, a link to the 4 books that I have on Amazon. and lots of other stuff about where I'm going to be and what I'm doing. So adamcarroll.info is the best place to go for that.
I just need you to write 3 more books, then I can just read your books and be considered an expert on this.
I'm working on it. The next one may be out next year. We'll see. There's so much to do, Michael. I found as an entrepreneur, I have ideas galore. And in fact, I almost want to start a site where I'm just giving away free ideas to people to go start businesses because I don't have the time or energy. But I love the idea of them, and books, especially for me, are near and dear. So I have no doubt there'll be another 1, 2, or 3, maybe here in the next 2 or 3 years.
Well, the faster you can get to 3, the better for me. So
right on.
I'd greatly appreciate it.
I'll get after it.
But thank you so much for coming on, Adam. I had a great time talking to you. I really appreciate your time, and I think the listeners do as well.
Thank you, Michael. Likewise, what you're doing is really important. Keep it up. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. And as always, thank you for listening to The Road to Financial Freedom. If you've enjoyed this show, please support the podcast by remembering to rate, review, and subscribe. You can keep up to date with us on Facebook or Instagram at Road to Financial Freedom Podcast. Thanks again, and I will see you all next time.